Get out! In my neighborhood growing up was an old Victorian mansion. It had been abandoned before I was born, and I'm 16 now. I would have loved to have seen it when it was built. It was a very grand home with lots of design work and many colors painted on the trim and facades. All decaying and faded now. No one had been inside for decades as far as I knew, and as kids, we were forbidden to play around that house. It was strictly off limits. Now I'm 16, and breaking the rules is part of the fun. And my friends don't need any arm twisting to push the limits. We decided it was time we investigate the boarded up mansion. We had heard other stories of older kids who had been inside, and that there was a secret way through a hole in the backside. We agreed to meet at the park at 8:30 the next night. It was summer vacation, so the sun stays up until 10. We thought that would give us enough time before it got too dark. We crawled into the house through the secret hole in the wall, the kitchen, and the breakfast room through which we entered. The rest of the house was intriguing and intact, except perhaps for smoke damage. We explored all the upstairs rooms beginning on the 3rd floor. It was on our way down from the 3rd floor something flashed across the hall behind us. We all got apprehensive as it caught all of our attention.
What was that? I don't know, it was too quick. Maybe a raccoon.
We all brushed away our concerns, as this seemed very probable, and continued our adventure on the 2nd floor. At the back end of the hallway was a closed door. It was a little difficult to push open, but we managed, and inside, sitting on a chair, was a human-sized teddy bear. The type you would win at a carnival or something like that. We were scared at first. It was such a shock to find an abandoned teddy bear sitting in a chair facing the door of an empty room. We quickly regained ourselves, laughing and enjoying our exploit. We were investigating another room when one of the guys whispered,
"Look here."
I looked to where he was pointing, and on the wall was written, "Get out." We all laughed again, saying that is spooky. I wonder how long that has been there. We were all feeling we were invincible tomb raiders. We turned to leave that room, and there was that shadowy flash again behind us. Someone in our gang whispered,
"I saw something moving."
I turned around, but nothing was there. But I had a feeling that set me on edge. We were all very uncomfortable by now. We headed back down the hall and past the room where we had seen the teddy bear just moments before. To our disbelief, it was gone. Only the chair was in its place, and the bear was nowhere to be seen. We looked at each other in horror. "Let's get out of here." We scrambled for that hole that was in the breakfast room as fast as we could. As we rounded the corner from the stairs into the dining room, we stopped in a crush of our bodies together. We all gasped in terror. Seated at the dusty table was the teddy bear. He was looking straight at us with a cold glare. Directly behind the bear, I could read the words scrawled on the wall, "Get out." We dashed for the kitchen door to get to the breakfast room escape, but as we entered the kitchen, a man of immense size stood blocking our way. I could not make out his features in the gloom, but I could make out clearly that he held a butcher knife in his hand. He took a step forward with this crazy smile. It was then that one of my friends jumped forward with a mop handle, plunging it like a bayonet. It struck the beast and he stepped 2 steps backward. The man didn't make a sound. My friend jabbed again, and the creep took 2 more steps backward, not making a sound, turned, and disappeared through a hole in the wall half hidden by the refrigerator. We bound for the escape hole to the backyard. Together we bolted for the park as fast as we could run. I was slightly behind the others and looked over my shoulder at the abandoned mansion. In the 2nd floor window stood the man holding the teddy bear. He was smiling and waved. Our Tomb Raider bravery no longer comforted us. This chilling nightmare was the scariest moment of our lives. Since I was very young, strange things have appeared to me in chilling nightmares. There were inexplicable wounds and mysterious injuries that I could not account for. It all started when I was in 1st grade, and I had a traumatic nightmare. I don't know what caused this nightmare. It felt all too real. It has traumatized me for years, and no child at any age should ever experience it. I dreamed that I was in a medieval town somewhere in Europe. I was sleeping as expected, but when I awoke, I was in this town in a rough-hewn house. It was a one-room dwelling with a fireplace kitchen. There was only one table at which an old hag of a woman sat. When I sat up in the bed in the same room, she said,
"Sit down and eat, dearie."
She acted just as my mother does towards me, but this wasn't my mother. She filled a bowl with a stew and lifted me up to sit on the chair at the table. I took the spoon she gave me and tasted what had been placed before me. I gagged and wanted to vomit. It was putrid. I stirred the stew and saw the bowl was filled with blood and human body parts. There was an eye and a tongue that floated in the red, clotting mess. I was terror-stricken and bolted from the table, pushing over the bowl that clattered to the floor in a bloody mess. I ran into the street and down a dirty alley which became a marketplace with dead bodies hanging from hooks and butchers carving humans as if they were pigs. The townsfolk milling about, greeting and chatting with each other as if coming from Sunday Mass. Strangely, the entire town was encircled by fire. The only way out of town was down a road through a field of brambles at the back, barricaded by an enormous wall of decaying human body parts. I keep begging people to help me get out, and they would smile at me and say,
"To get out, you must eat through the bodies."
I was screaming and begging them to let me go. When I awoke, I was frantically clawing over the mountain of dead human corpses trying to escape. I was too scared to tell my mom and dad. I had this nightmare over and over again. I would wake in great terror, soaked wet in sweat. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw human flesh decaying all around me. That was the beginning of the delirium that haunted me in that house. Soon, I would begin waking each day, covered in black and blue marks and cat-like scratches over my body. As time passed, my hair became thin and brittle, my golden hair turned nearly black, and my olive complexion a transparent and sickly white. My blue eyes went dark, and I would see shadowy black figures in every room. Years have passed, and I am nothing more than a ghoulish shadow of myself. I'm sure it is the haunted house itself that has taken over my flesh. Nothing has induced as much fear as this little girl. Growing up, spirits, ghosts, and unexplained things happened in our house, which never bothered me. As a child, I never expected to be directly affected by an unseen apparition. But when I entered adulthood, one did. My family growing up wasn't rich. We weren't even middle class. I grew up on the poor side of the tracks. When I was old enough to work, I worked hard to buy my own property and not live in the tenements. I purchased a property with a rundown old home. It wasn't much to look at, but I was proud of it, as it was my own. I had worked hard and saved hard to buy it. I was married, and we had a toddler. My wife and I remodeled the house to make it a comfortable home. Shortly after we moved in, strange things began to happen. I wasn't disturbed, as it was like my home growing up, and I'm sure much of that was my imagination, just as it was in our new home. Most things were like the cupboards would open on their own, and things would move across the counter all by themselves. Our son's battery-operated toys were especially affected, and would start playing and flashing without being turned on. One evening, my wife was preparing dinner and doing house cleaning. She set a pot on the stove to boil or simmer, and go to vacuum or set the table or whatever. And every time she returned to the kitchen, the gas was turned off. The first time she thought she had bumped the knob, but after a second and third time, she was sure it wasn't her. My wife was like me because she had experienced strange phenomena as a child and was spiritual. So, she addressed the entity in the kitchen, saying, "Please leave the stove alone. I will watch it carefully." The stove remained on for the rest of the time. Over dinner, I asked my wife why she said what she said. She said that she had seen a little girl in a white dress and barefoot wandering around the house since they moved in. She was 7 or 8 years of age. I had not felt any presence, so I asked how often she had seen her. She said it was nearly daily, but she wasn't worried about the girl. The child had made her presence steadily more known, but she showed no harm, so my wife never mentioned it. She didn't mind the little girl meandering about the house. A few months after the kitchen stove incident, our toddler did not want to sleep in his room. He would throw a tantrum each night at bedtime. The nighttime behavior got worse and worse, and we became frustrated. He was fighting each time we tried to lay him in his crib. It was finally decided that my wife would try to communicate with the little girl's spirit and see if she could calm the situation. At the same time, we set up a nanny cam that had excellent night vision to record if there was any other movement in the room. The next night, the 3 of us were in the living room reading and listening to music while our son played on the floor with his dinosaurs. Eventually, he fell asleep on the couch, and I picked him up and quietly carried him to his crib. I returned to the living room with the monitor from the nanny cam to keep an eye on him. The first several hours were silent, and he was sleeping restfully. I thought everything was just our imagination and that my wife and I should go to bed. I stood up from the couch, and at that instant, the baby monitor lit up like a carnival. Every toy in our son's room was suddenly turned on. All those toys that flash and play music. Each car and truck with lights and sirens were on. Chills shot through me, and I ran to my son, now screaming in his crib. As I picked him up, I could hear a little girl giggling. She began a song as if she was playing hopscotch or skipping rope in this creepy, childlike voice. The following morning, I called a coworker who also has experience with the paranormal, and she came. She has never been to my home before. I have never spoken to her about the spirits in our house, only about my childhood experiences. She entered our house and immediately discerned that a little girl was present. We sat in the dining room, and after a minute, she said there was someone else there as well. She said she thought it was the little girl's father. She went on to communicate in a trance with the spirit. Apparently, the little girl had died in a fire that had started in the kitchen. The father also desperately attempted to save his daughter from the flames, perished. The 2 spirits have remained in the house for nearly 80 years, stuck in the afterlife. The little girl told her she was angry when the stove was unattended. I had never mentioned the stove incident that my wife had with the little girl in the white dress. My coworker spoke to the spirits, thanked them for their care, and told them they could move on in their journey. That night, my son curled up in his crib without a fuss and was sound asleep in minutes. I don't believe the little girl had any intent to harm anyone in our home. The antics with the toys were merely her having fun with a new playmate. I went to the public library and searched the local papers from that era until I found a front-page article about a fire where a father and daughter had burned. The newspaper story was exactly as my coworker had described. Nothing I had experienced since had caused so much fear in me than this chilling nightmare when my son's room lit up with the little girl giggling and singing.